This is Tar Heel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
Art is a powerful medium by which to get a message across. Today's guest is using her talents as a filmmaker as a way to educate, enlighten, inform, and heal. Dawn Dreyer has struggled with mental illness for 2 decades, and now she has produced and directed a documentary entitled Bipolar Girl Rules the World and Other Stories. And joining me now to tell us more about her project is Dawn Dreyer. Dawn, welcome
Thank
to
you
Tar
so
Heel Talk.
much. Thank you for having me, Sonia. I appreciate it very much.
Take us back to when you first started experiencing symptoms of mental illness. What kinds of things were you feeling?
So my experiences of, at first, primarily depression, I think that the main aspect for me is just a desire to retreat. I mean, and just this feeling of numbness. You know, I always think there's a big difference between like sadness and depression. Like sadness, you're actually feeling something, right? But with depression, it's just like, it's kind of nothing, kind of a nothingness. And I think the other piece of it was just this and has been for a number of years, this, until recently, kind of a feeling of isolation, of separateness. And so, you know, I always say, like, people will be like, how can you be depressed? Because you're so cheerful. And I don't sort of like give this look of like being a depressed person. And I, you know, had things that I enjoyed to do, being out in the community. But the thing is that it's just so impossible to appreciate the life. It's not that you don't have one. It's just I wasn't in a place to ever appreciate it and be grateful for what I had, and that made me feel worse actually, because it's like, well, why are you what's going on with you if you can't appreciate what you have?
So at what point then did you reach out and get some medical help?
Oh, gosh, I've been very fortunate really since I saw a therapist for the first time in my teens, and having a really good therapist has been a huge part, or different ones over the years, has been a huge part of being well, moving towards wellness, maintaining mental wellness, or overall wellness, I guess. So there's been certainly like a therapy. Also, I have had access to really wonderful psychiatrists, and also practices like dialectical behavioral therapy, where it's kind of a combination of mindfulness practice and learning different skills, like to better communicate and to manage intense emotions, which are honestly skills that anyone can use. And I say all this just to make the point that I've been incredibly privileged with the kind of treatment and access to treatment I've received. It's extremely uncommon, and it needs to be much more common, because there's so many just amazing, incredible people who have all of this potential, and the potential is being lost because the treatment just isn't available. It's not accessible. And so that's something I always carry with me, that I do feel like very privileged to have had the kind of care that allows me to do the kind of work that I do.
Right, and the work that you're doing is making an incredible documentary that addresses mental illness, something that is not an easy topic for a lot of people to talk about. Talk a little bit about the process and how this has evolved.
Right. So somewhere in the mid-2000s, I started drawing this character called Bipolar Girl, and her sidekick, Casey the Wonder Dog, right? And I've always doodled, and so I had my journals, and I doodled these different characters and different adventures, and they would battle against the creature, who is a combination of perfectionism and depression and shame, right? Which is a really difficult combination to get through. And so Bipolar Girl was all about like persistence and determination and dark humor, because that is definitely a way that my family, we kind of survive things through sort of dark humor. And then Casey the Wonder Dog based on an actual dog that I had for a long time, she's sort of this furry bundle of compassion and loyalty and love. And so, I started kind of playing out these different characters in my doodles. And I think what was important is at that time, it allowed me to have just a little bit of distance between myself and being able to kind of see what was happening. I think it was, whether it's like writing in a journal, or for me, writing in a journal and doodling, or it just gave me anyway, enough perspective to be able to step back a little and see more about what was kind of happening in my life. And my understanding of the characters have changed throughout the process of, this, I guess 2007 was when I really got going on the film, to today. So.
Well, there's an excerpt from your film called She Wakes.
Yes.
We want to take a look at that. Do you want to set it up for us?
Sure. So getting out of bed in the morning was it was one of the most, my difficulty was one of the most visible signs, or sort of symbols to me of my depression. And I had a tremendous amount of shame around it. So this is actually the first of the short segments that feature pieces of my story that I worked on with the illustrator Emily Ensminger. So this is where we started, and this is where she took my scribbles of Bipolar Girl and the other characters and turned them into these illustrations.
Okay, well, let's take a look at She Wakes.
Great.
The second I wake up, I'm deluged by hideous voices crowing my worthlessness. Shame weighs me down into the bed. I shrink under the covers, curl into myself, seek refuge in sleep. The snooze button doles out relief in 10-minute increments. But each time I wake, the shame grows larger, smothering me, making it hard to breathe. Every recognizable part of me is consumed. Smart, pretty, brave, funny, successful, loved. Emerging like boils on my skin are shame's beloved companions: idiocy, revulsion, contempt. I am too much of everything except what I am not. There is no middle ground left for me to stand on. I am not merely fat, I am a vile mound of flesh. I'm not just late for work, I'm incompetent beyond redemption. I am not merely alone in this bed, save from my loyal canine companion. I am literally and existentially alone and will never again experience the touch of a beloved. I am not yet ready to admit I cannot get out of bed because I am sick with depression. I am not yet willing to admit my mind is not my own to manage. I would prefer to believe that my failure is one of the will, and that it is my strength, not submission, that will set me free. I was raised to believe that no challenge was insurmountable with sufficient effort. I have bought into the cult of self-esteem, sinking my savings into the self-help marketplace. What I have learned from my commitment to this mythology of will is that my suffering is my fault. As counterintuitive as it might seem, this belief comforts because it allows me to maintain an illusion of control.
A powerful take on your personal story. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. We'll be back with more Tar Heel Talk after these messages. My guest today is filmmaker Dawn Dreyer of Durham. Her documentary, Bipolar Girl Rules the World and Other Stories, is an animated documentary that addresses various forms of mental illness. Now, Dawn, before the break, you shared a piece that talks a little bit about your personal story, your battle with depression. How therapeutic was it for you to be able to put those feelings into words and then into a film?
It was very powerful to have Emily Ensminger, who is the illustrator, who made the drawings, to have her reflect back to me my experiences in this way. It was, for coming from a place of feeling very isolated, I felt very seen, very understood, and it was also the product of collaboration, which for me was very exciting, because that's something, that I just so enjoy, as a person, as an artist, and so the work itself was pretty incredible. And then, in terms of showing this work to other people, and having people respond to it and identify with the stories I'm telling, that's been just surprising to me, in that I didn't expect so many people that I either spoke to about this work or who saw it to say to me, yes, me too. I struggle with depression. My mother was bipolar. My best friend, is going through a hard time. It seemed like there were all of these stories that were just bubbling beneath the surface, waiting to come out, and waiting maybe just for someone to introduce the topic. And, this wasn't just, among people, who were, at a screening because it was with the National Alliance for Mental Illness. This was people at film festivals, all different kinds of places.
Right.
So I think it just really speaks to both the stigma that keeps all of these stories kind of quiet, and then also just like the longing to connect and for people to tell their own story, which is something that is a critical part of this project as well.
And as you mentioned, that stigma and the shame associated with mental illness oftentimes does make it uncomfortable for people to talk about their stories. That being said, how were you able to find other people who were willing to speak out and share something that is very personal in a very public way?
Right. Well, most of the documentary work I do is very relationship based. I don't go up to strangers very often and ask them for their stories. So, for example, Hayesh Broom, who is one of the people in the film, I met her when she and her mother Pam came up to Durham after Hurricane Katrina. They came up and were living in Durham for a while, and I was talking to Hayesh and her mom. Hayesh is also a filmmaker. I was talking with them about this project, and I said, oh, well, and I'm bipolar. Bipolar girl rules the world. And she said, oh, I'm bipolar too. And I was like, well, are you bipolar too, or bipolar also? Because, they're, and she was like, yes, yes, yes. So we had this conversation, and I, by the time I'd done this interview, I'd known her for probably 5 years or so. So some of it, I think, is relationship, and then just, a kind of trust that I'm going to honor her words.
Absolutely. And so you were able to capture her words and her experience in another section of your documentary that you call Knit Together.
Knit Together, right, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So
Do we have that available to show?
The depression for me, it feels like I feel small, like a teeny tiny in the corner small. I've been on the stay in the house for like a month, and I get very confused in the head. I'll listen to music and I would cry. The depression is like me feeling intimidated by someone. Without one of the medicines that I take, I would shake. I'm a different personality, like I'm 5 or something. Sometimes when I'm in a deep depression, I don't know that I was in depression until it's over. I remember the first time I heard voices, it would sound like it was coming far away and like saying, hey, yes, and who does she think she is? And I was so confused. At one point, I thought it was neighbors. I don't know if I'm hearing something outside or if it's, me. It's just, yeah.
So those were the words of your now friend.
Yes, very
that-
good friend. Yes, Hayesh Broom. That's right. Yeah, yeah. I'm close with her whole family, so it's recently, it's Mental Health Month, and so I've been putting little pieces of the film on Twitter, and it's just very exciting because I think she feels like very proud of having told her story. And the clip you just saw, it's at the very beginning of the process. The images are sort of made by this great artist from Durham, Franco, and they are there to sort of suggest a style of animation that we're considering. But both She Wakes and Knit Together are still in the fairly early stages. But even so, I always feel like we just can't wait to share them because I don't know, the stories are powerful, and I think that with She Wakes and some of the other pieces that are in my voice or that are part of my story, I have given talks where I've shown them and then answered questions, and so the film is the goal. We're going to get to the feature-length film, but in the meantime, the pieces are already out there getting some work done. So that's the goal, is to keep moving forward, though.
Why did you decide to take the approach of animation as opposed to having these people on camera and actually interviewing them on camera?
Right. Well, I come from a background as a writer and an audio documentary person. I've done radio pieces, and I just love voices. There's something about an individual telling their own story and just speaking their truth, right? But I didn't want it to just, be a talking head, right? Because I don't, so I was like, well, how can we be kind of visually creative? How can we create a compelling visual narrative? And the idea of pairing the voices with animation actually came to me. There's a wonderful film that has a similar style, and it's about loneliness. And I thought, one, what a brave subject matter, but I just loved the way that that sort of brought the stories to life. So it enters the imagination in a way, and I think it also, for people who might not want to approach the subject, I think it's just another way in, So.
Sure, absolutely. We're going to take another break, and we'll talk more in just a moment. We're going to actually take a look at the short film Fear.
Great.
We'll be back with more Tar Heel Talk after these messages. Welcome back to Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. We're talking today with filmmaker Dawn Dreyer. Her documentary, Bipolar Girl Rules the World and Other Stories, is an animated documentary that shares parts of her own struggle with mental illness, as well as narratives from others living with mental illness. Dawn, your short film, Fear, has been getting rave reviews, was featured at Tribeca Film Festival. Whoopi Goldberg is a fan.
Yeah.
Tell us about this.
Right. So Fear is the first of the segments of Bipolar Girl that we've completely animated. So it's both its own standalone short film, and it is part of the larger film. And as you said, yes, it just had its premiere at Tribeca, which was pretty incredible.
Absolutely. So, and we have a segment of Fear here to show, so let's take a look at that.
Wonderful.
I started my depression when I was close to 4 years old. We were living in Beijing, China back then. My parents were prosecuted and being taken away by the Chinese authority. So my sister, who was 12 years old then, took care of me daily life. She even had a hard time to take care of herself. I felt tremendous fear. Hopeless, helpless, and powerless. So part of a fear made me want to disappear from the earth. And I constantly looking for help. Help didn't come. I grew up during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. It was a massive movement launched by the General Secretary of the Communist Party to cleanse the bourgeoisie. during Cultural Revolution and also later days, the fear kept me out of trouble. And constantly self-aware retreat and watch what I say. Otherwise, in a country without speech or freedom, I could easily get trouble because there was execution during those days for speaking against the government, right? Roosevelt said the biggest fear is fear itself. I have a fear of success, a fear of being the center of attention, a fear of praise, a fear of being promoted, of being given too much money by the corporations, of being given too little money, fear of rejection, fear of death, being promoted, fear of rejection, fear of death.
And again, that is an excerpt from your short film, Fear. Very powerful story told by one of your friends.
Yes, another,
Dr.
yeah,
Chen.
Zhanglo Chen, yes, Dr. Zhanglo Chen.
And how
That's
did you
right.
two connect and begin to share this personal story?
Right. So Zhanglo and I actually were in a therapy group together. And one day he stood up in the midst of it and said, "Dawn, you are my sister." And I thought, I didn't know him very well, but I thought, what an interesting thing, to say. And I wanted to know more about him. And so we met and had coffee, and he knew that I was doing a film. And so he started telling me the story that starts the film. I was 4 years old, and my sister took care. And I was just like, stop, don't tell me anymore until I get my recorder, because I knew it was one of those rare moments where I was like, and that's the beginning of the film. Like, I just knew. Like, that was, so yeah, and again, it was very interesting. He saw the finished film, was one of the first people who saw it, and it was very powerful for him. And his wife of many years said she learned more in those 7 minutes about her husband, they both couldn't believe how well Andrea Love, who is my co-director on the film and who did the animation and some of the sound, the sound design.
Job.
I mean, she'd never met him, and so it was quite a process between the two of us. But her work is just, it's going to be hard to bring the rest of the film to that level. So it's a good challenge, but it's really, her work is just amazing.
So you've covered a variety of forms of mental illness in your film, and they come from people of all backgrounds. I believe in your second segment, your interviewee came from New Orleans. Then Dr. Chen came from Beijing, China.
Right.
And so you're showing that there is no race, no one single race, income level, profession who is more impacted by mental illness than another. This can really happen to anyone, and is happening to a lot of people in our community, and we may not realize it.
Right. And I think what's been, I never assumed that my stories around mental illness would necessarily connect, with people who are very different from me, and in any number of different ways. But what's been really exciting about this film is that I feel like there are, I've seen, that there are common experiences, and even if they're, or common enough that they're the beginning of a conversation. And that's what's really important to me, is this film, first and foremost, my first audience for this film are other people with the lived experience of mental illness and the people who love them. And, I'm wanting to create opportunities for connection and opportunities to talk with each other, because we really, I think we need each other.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, I think that this film is a good tool for people who may not experience mental illness to help understand more about it. We have about 30 seconds left. I want you to be able to tell our viewers how they can find out more information about your film.
Right. So the easiest way is to go to the website for Bipolar Girl Rules the World and Other Story, which is bipolargirldoc.com.
Okay. Dawn Dreyer, filmmaker extraordinaire. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for sharing so many important stories with all of us. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.